Hello there everybody, my name is Aubrey and this is Haggis, my entirely deaf cat, who I guess is going to be hanging out with us today. So if you hear purring or anything in the background, that's just him entertaining himself. And today we're going to talk a little bit about my metastatic papillary thyroid carcinoma diagnosis, which was about 3 years ago now. Totally bananas to think about because it feels like it was both years ago and yesterday at the same time. And I'm excited to share this story with you, and also a little bit nervous because it definitely is one of those stories that I tell to some people when they ask, but then have been largely avoiding it here on YouTube. It's long, I worry it gets boring, but hopefully you guys might be able to learn something from it and avoid some of the mistakes I made while I was trying to get my diagnosis. So when I was about 18, I was entering my freshman year of college where I was studying the voice, and it was definitely a lot of fun, very tricky, very challenging, and the first semester goes by pretty well. Then entering into my winter break, I contract some sort of illness, and it was particularly bad. I had a fever for over a week that I could not break with Tylenol. My throat was extremely swollen and sore. My lymph nodes were absolutely gargantuan. They were so big that they looked like eggs. And if I can find a photo of it, I will post it here. And they were swelling up all of my face and neck. It was deeply uncomfortable, and I had a lot of joint pain, and it was an extremely unpleasant time. So bad that I ended up having to go see the doctor, and a bunch of tests were run. Flu, strep throat, everything. But for some reason it took about 3-4 weeks to get diagnosed with what I actually had, which was a really bad case of mono. After that, it probably took another 2 to 3 months for me to really clear a lot of the major symptoms. So it was just a long haul with this mono, and I could not shake it for the life of me. But I ended up finishing that first year, it went well, and I entered into summer vacation. Despite summer not necessarily being a time for illness, I ended up getting like 3 or 4 colds in quick succession, which was extremely abnormal for me and probably abnormal for most 18 to 19-year-olds. It ended up causing me to go see the doctor. So I would go and see her with the same complaints 3 or 4 times, which was I had these fevers that were cyclical and I just couldn't go away. I was dealing with extreme fatigue that when I compared it to my peers, it didn't seem very similar to theirs. And I was also struggling with these very hot and inflamed joints, as well as these absolutely gargantuan lymph nodes. So my lymph nodes were about 1 centimeter to about 1.5 inches, and they were even visible on my neck, which was so strange. I had these very thick lines, which I still have a little bit of, but they used to be extremely prominent, to the point where I remember during this period going and seeing a dermatologist about them and wondering if there was any filler or something that I could do to fix them, because they were a point of extreme self-consciousness for me. I really disliked these lines. But she was telling me, no, there's really nothing we can do. And I was like, okay, fine. So side quest, right? And I finish out the summer and I go back to school, and this problem doesn't go away. So I'm dealing with these random fevers, these lymph nodes that just blow up and make it impossible for me to sing very well. And it's very painful. I would have a very sore throat, but not a sore throat like strep throat or a cold. It was like pain, like muscular pain, or the feeling that if you yawn forever and you just never let your throat relax, it felt like tension pain in my throat. And it made for not very pleasant sounds when I was singing. I would go and see my doctor, and with these same complaints that I had over the summer, I would get the same response, which was, well, you're very young, so you're probably not that sick. It's probably what we call a biofilm, which means it's some sort of infection somewhere in your body, and we just can't reach it. So she continuously prescribed me various antibiotics. So throughout the summer and my second year of college, I was on a lot of antibiotics. I would also get blood tests. I would get a CBC every single time, and everything would always come back largely normal. which was very frustrating because I looked at my CBC results and it really showed no sign of an infection. So all of the markers that would be associated with an infection were completely normal. However, I always had a positive ANA. And I remember asking my doctor, what's an ANA? Why do I have a positive ANA? And she said, well, you don't really have anything that's specific, so I can't diagnose you with anything. You're just gonna have to like work that ANA up later in your life because then you'll show more specific symptoms. Right now, it's too vague for me to diagnose you. And I was like, okay, that sounds weird, but whatever. And so she told me that every time. And so this went on for the rest of my college experience. So in and out of the doctor's office, lots of antibiotics, lots of blood tests, all the blood tests coming back largely normal except for this positive ANA. And she would say the same thing. You're not showing symptoms that allow me to find a diagnosis, so we'll have to wait until your symptoms get worse, and then I'll be able to diagnose you with something. So I, being young and not a doctor, assumed that that is the way the doctors do things. I am now older and wiser and know that that's not the case, but that's neither here nor there. After college, still had this same problem. Cyclical fevering, severe joint pains, absolutely gargantuan lymph nodes that were just not able to really go down in size, and when they did, it would just end up coming back after a couple weeks. And it was just really frustrating. I felt crazy. Honestly, I felt absolutely bananas because every time I asked for my doctor's help, she would tell me that nothing was wrong. And she made me feel like it was ridiculous that I was trying to seek out an answer at the moment, even though it was extremely frustrating and really hindering my quality of life and my career and everything. I look back and I wonder what kind of person I would have been if I actually had more reliability in my voice, because I definitely turned down a lot of opportunities and I didn't pursue as much of my career building in those earlier years because I just couldn't trust my voice to just be there. I decided to do other things, which was mainly going into teaching. To be fair, I'm very grateful that I did because I love it a lot, but I have always wondered what my career would look like if I had figured out what was going on earlier. But hindsight is 2020. But anyways, let's fast forward 2 years after my graduation and into the pandemic. So during this time, obviously, a lot is happening. And every time I had a flare-up, it made me concerned that I might have COVID because there's a lot of overlap in the symptoms. Lo and behold, I catch it one time, but all the other times were just this amorphous disease that I had no idea what it was called or what to do about it other than take more antibiotics. At the time, my partner was finishing med school and we were hanging out with a lot of other med students, and I remember us talking a little bit with some of his friends and, expressing some of my experiences. And a lot of them all agreed that it was probably some autoimmune condition, which is not hard to imagine. My mother has a long history of autoimmune. Her mother and her twin sister both have severe RA and other autoimmune conditions. So I kind of just believed it because that's true. I have been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but that was after the fact. But I kind of assumed, okay, that makes sense. The blood tests always come back negative for infection. The antibiotics don't really do anything, but every time I give it a little bit of time, it seems to be like a flare-up. It goes away on its own, and then it comes back. Autoimmune it is. And I go another year or two just kind of assuming that I have some unnamed, as of right now, autoimmune condition. And that works pretty well for me. I kind of accept it and I start finally feeling confident enough to sing more, and I let people know, like, hey, I am trying to navigate this disease that makes my voice extremely unreliable, and I find people who are okay with that. And so I finally start being able to participate again in music-related adventures, which was absolutely phenomenal. As we end our time in Chicago, which is where I used to live, I ended up having one more big flare-up, and I brought my partner with me this time to go see my doctor. So same thing. I show up and it's the same presentation: lymph nodes, fever, joint pain. You get the drift. And I'm looking at my doctor, and at this point, for the last 6 years, she has been seeing me in this exact same office and never giving me any answers and really not doing any tests except for the CBC plus an autoimmune panel. She looks at me and goes, okay, nothing's changed. And I said, well, I am exhausted. It's been years of this and it's interrupting my career development. I really need a solution. And I remember her saying very rudely, I'm going to try and imitate how she said it. Well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to give you a CT scan? Is that going to make you happy or what? And I remember just being absolutely flabbergasted by her response and said, well, you're the doctor, so I am just asking you what you think we should do. I'm asking for help. And my partner asked her, how do you know it's not cancer? And she goes, well, because she's too young. And he goes, that's not an appropriate response because lymph nodes that are cyclical could be autoimmune, but it also could be cancer. And she goes, well, it's not cancer. And that was kind of the end of the meeting. And I end up getting my referral to the CT. And when I called them to schedule it, they said, well, your insurance has rejected it because your doctor wrote in that it was not medically indicated. So I was put in this position where I either pay out of pocket like $3,000, $2,000, $3,000. I can't remember exactly what it was quoted for, but it was over $1,000 for a CT scan. Or I just don't pay it and I accept the fact that my doctor doesn't think I'm sick. And of course, this is the pandemic and I'm a musician, so I don't have that money. Like, I don't have anything close to that kind of money. And so I do not do the CT scan. I accept that my doctor thinks that I'm just an attention seeker and that I'm making up all of these symptoms. And so I decide to move on with my life and pretend that I have nothing wrong with me and just kind of go on. Another year and a half goes by and we move here to Hawaii, and my partner's like, well, you have to go to a new GP anyways, so you should tell the GP again what your symptoms are and just get another opinion. You really shouldn't let this go. And I was like, okay, fine. So I go and I see a new GP. He's very nice and he can see that I'm a bit more of a white coat syndrome kind of person, aka I get extremely anxious in doctor's offices, and I still do to this day. And I explained my whole story and he goes, huh, that is strange. And I was like, what do you mean strange? And obviously I have already had discussions with my partner about the fact that he does worry. He was particularly worried about lymphoma, and I was not sure about anything because I'm not a doctor. And so he goes, no, I think we need to get some imaging. I think we need to see what's going on with those lymph nodes. So he orders a bunch of tests and he also orders an ultrasound of my neck. So I go in for that ultrasound a couple weeks later, and they do the ultrasound. And I remember the doctor who was performing the ultrasound, because there was a couple technicians and also a doctor. But that first initial meeting, he does a check of everything going on in my neck, and he does see the lymph nodes. And as he's looking at these lymph nodes, he kind of goes through the rest of my neck and he notices that there's some nodules on my thyroid. He points out that most nodules on the thyroid, 5%, are cancerous. All the rest are completely benign. So he's like, I'm not worried, but I am worried. And I was like, okay. And he also then sends a note to my doctor that there are some funky looking things going on in my thyroid. My GP calls me later that day and goes, I need you to go in for a deeper biopsy, a bigger tissue sample, and you're gonna have to go back and they're gonna go cut out a piece of that thyroid. So I'm like, okay. I go back and I get the lumps in my thyroid biopsied. And of course I'm worried, But at this point, I've kind of come to the realization that I think I might have cancer. And my mother had thyroid cancer as well when she was in her like late 20s, early 30s. So it's not completely abnormal, and it probably points to something genetic, which I have never really researched or anything, but it's possible. So kind of understood it to be likely that the reason why my lymph nodes were so large was because there was cancer. And so I get the results of my biopsy of the thyroid first, and it is positive for thyroid cancer. I was both surprised and not surprised. Like I mentioned, I had already kind of come to this realization that I probably did have some sort of cancer, and I'm kind of pushed very quickly in to go and see a surgeon. So I go in and see a really nice surgeon. She was really, really sweet. And she's like, well, I need to go see your neck now. So she orders a CT with contrast of my neck, and she sees some structures that are a little abnormal. And the radiologist originally said, I think it's just in the thyroid. I think this is not metastasized. And she does not agree. And so she actually calls her husband, who apparently is a radiologist, to look as well. And that night they had looked together at my scans, which I'm very grateful for. She was a really, really nice doctor. And they looked and they realized that I did have metastasis. And it has gone all the way down to almost my clavicle. And so she calls me in the next day and she's like, look, like, I know the radiologist said that you probably don't have metastasis, but I completely disagree, and I don't feel comfortable doing your surgery anymore because now it's going to need to be a neck dissection. She's like, I can do it, but I would suggest you see this other doctor who is a specialist, and I'm going to refer you to the Head and Neck Cancer Institute, and they're probably going to put you on a tumor board, which means doctors are going to come together and decide what to do. And so, of course, that was actually, like, I think the scariest experience was like having a surgeon say, no, I don't really want to work on you because I'm worried that I might not be the best for you. She meant it in the nicest way possible because I was a singer, and this surgery is now more complicated. Even though thyroidectomies are already something that can cause you to lose your voice, this was going to be a particularly difficult surgery. So she really wanted me to go to the best, which I, to this day, am very grateful for. So at this point, I have proven thyroid cancer in my thyroid. I have imaging showing where it probably has spread, and those FNAs of my lymph nodes have come back also positive. So I go in and I am now shuttled to another hospital system, a different one, because I was at a different hospital. And I meet with the fancy surgeon over at the Head and Neck Cancer Institute. And then he goes, I'm not worried about your surgery at all. I'll make sure everything goes really well. I'll get it all clean. No worries. I then start the process of getting ready for surgery. I think most of you guys have probably seen my earlier videos describing the biopsies and the tests and the CT with contrast and all that. Since then, I have met with rheumatologists, endocrinologists, ENTs, I have a laryngologist. I have all these people who have made me feel very supported and very relaxed. I feel very confident in my diagnosis. I feel very confident in my long-term life and quality of life. I'm immensely happy. I am so grateful that I did end up finding good doctors eventually, but I think my story, along with many stories, I'm not unique in my story in the sense that, like, I had a doctor who was neglectful and didn't want to give me a real diagnosis. I now feel that it's my responsibility to encourage people whenever I get the chance to tell them to get second opinion. I think it's a completely fair question to ask, why are you prescribing this? Or, okay, but what's on the differential? Meaning, what other illnesses could it possibly be? And how would you be able to prove your diagnosis through things like tests? You know, how do you know it's not the other things on the differential? I'm very grateful that I didn't need further intervention, and at this point, I don't look like I need further care like radiation or point beam or any of that. So yeah, I got very lucky, and I had a great surgeon. I had a great team. I think my biggest mistake was not fighting more for my own health and not questioning the doctors because I felt insecure to do so. And I want everyone, regardless of their age, to practice being able to stand up for themselves and be able to have constructive conversations with their medical team. And so yeah, that was my misdiagnosis to diagnosis story. If you have any questions or comments or want to share your own experiences about doctors, feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll read through them. But otherwise, I really hope all of you guys stay happy and healthy, and I will see you again later. Bye.